Today, we are tackling a real geopolitical puzzle. You have a nation that is absolutely obsessed with reclaiming its lost territories. So, why on earth would it legally and permanently sign away its claim to a massive northern region, including the huge port city of Vladivostok? So, our story kicks off with a pretty quiet but really significant move from Beijing. Not too long ago, the Chinese government started requiring its new maps to use the old historical Chinese names for cities in Russia's Far East. That includes Vladivostok, which is now also labeled Haishenwai. Now, this might seem like a small detail, but it cracks open a huge question about a deal that was made decades ago. And this is where things get, well, really interesting. Look at the South China Sea. Beijing is incredibly aggressive there, right? Building artificial islands, staring down foreign navies, all to enforce its claims. But then you look north, and it's a completely different story. They made a stunning reversal, legally giving up a region they once controlled for centuries. So what gives? Why the completely different approaches? How could a government that built its entire identity on reversing a century of humiliation turn around and basically rubber stamp one of the very treaties that caused it? Okay, let's dive in. To figure this out, we have to follow the paper trail. We need to look at the actual treaties that put this concession into international law. The legal story really begins way back in 1860 with the Treaty of Peking. This was forced on a very weak Qing dynasty, making them give up a huge chunk of territory to Tsarist Russia. For more than 100 years, this was seen as one of China's great unequal treaties. But then, fast forward to 1991, and then again in 2001, and modern China and Russia signed new agreements that finalize that exact same border. Now, check out the language here. Article 6 of that 2001 treaty, it couldn't be any clearer. It says both sides have no territorial claims on each other. Boom. With just those few words, Beijing legally accepted the 1860 border. They turned a historical humiliation into a permanent, modern reality. And the big question is, why would they do that? Well, the first big piece of the puzzle takes us to the early 1990s. This was a time when China's military desperately needed a modern upgrade, and it had pretty much nowhere to turn. Except, you guessed it, to its northern neighbor. After the Tiananmen Square crackdown in 1989, China basically became a pariah state. The US and Europe hit it with heavy arms embargoes, and this left the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, with what was essentially a museum of 1960s-era military tech. They were falling way, way behind their rivals. And this is where Russia comes into the picture. Russia was broke after the Soviet collapse, and they saw an opportunity. They became China's military lifeline. Right at the same time these border talks were happening, Russia started selling China its most advanced military gear. We're talking top-of-the-line fighter jets, super quiet submarines, and modern air defense systems. It was a total military makeover package. And let me tell you, some of this stuff was a serious threat. The Sovereignty destroyers China bought, they came armed with the SSN-22 Sunburn missile. Back then, this was one of the most feared anti-ship missiles on the planet, and it was designed specifically to get past the defenses of American warships. It seems like securing the border went hand in hand with getting the tools for a modern military. But hold on, this wasn't just some simple land-for-gun swap. The weapons were actually part of a much, much bigger strategic plan. Let's see how this all connects. You know, there's a brilliant theory from political scientist M. Taylor Fravell that really helps explain this. His idea is that countries, especially when they feel insecure at home, will often make really generous deals on their borders. And why would they do that? Well, to neutralize a potential fight on one front so they can pour all their energy into another more important one. And that is exactly what China did. After Tiananmen, the leadership felt deeply insecure. So they made a cold, hard calculation. Step 1. Permanently settle that long, quiet 2,500-mile border with Russia. Get rid of that massive strategic headache. And then, step 2. Pivot. Take the military, now being upgraded with all that Russian hardware, and refocus it on the primary threats to the south and east. We're talking about Taiwan and the South China Sea. So, you see, Beijing's decision wasn't about forgetting history. Not at all. It was a cold, pragmatic choice about which parts of that history were most critical for its future. This ledger really lays it all out. When it came to Hong Kong, lost to the British, Beijing was dead set on reversing that unequal treaty. And they did. With Taiwan, reunification is still a core, non-negotiable goal. But with Vladivostok, the strategic value of a secure northern border and a modern military was simply worth more than the historical claim. they chose to ratify that particular unequal treaty so they could go after their other, more urgent ambitions. Which brings us right back to that map. If the deal was such a strategic win, why start bringing up the old names now? This official rule from the Ministry of Natural Resources was no accident. It specifically requires that Vladivostok be labeled with its old Chinese name, Haishenwai, which means Sea Cucumber Bay, right alongside its Russian name. And this isn't just some dusty, bureaucratic decision. It actually taps into a growing nationalist vibe you see online. I mean, just look at this tweet from a state media journalist a few years back. There's a clear story being pushed. This land was Chinese before Russia grabbed it. So what is really going on here? Well, this move could be a few things at once. It might just be a simple nod to nationalists at home, keep them happy. More strategically, it could be a subtle reminder to Moscow about the new power dynamic between them, especially with Russia tied down by the war in Ukraine. Or maybe it's a quiet placeholder, a way of saying, yeah, the treaty is signed, but historical memory is very, very long. And all of this leaves us with a final, provocative thought. China made that deal in the 1990s from a position of relative weakness, but today, it's a global superpower. That Haishenwai map is a little reminder that in geopolitics, even when the ink on a treaty is dry, history is never really over.